how do we start this? Well, I guess since we are talking about the revolution, I think the logical standpoint is to actually go over what's happening with the street movements in Egypt right now, and especially the street movement that is not connected to a political party. So when I'm talking about this, I am discounting all of the demonstrations, for example, that the Muslim Brotherhood might be starting, because those are, they're bringing in their actual group into this, and they're not actually street activists in any way or form. They're simply, the generational byproduct of the party itself. Now, the street movement in Egypt so far is still diverse and largely disorganized, and has lost, a lot of the enthusiasm of the original Jan 25 people. This was not the case at the beginning of the year, but as things settle down, it's becoming more and more so. Mainly because people who have joined and participated in it are starting to believe that there are more dangers in place than actually the fight with SCAF or elsewhere. Mainly also because the timeline that SCAF has set on for the transfer of power, whatever the transfer of power means, and I'm going to get to that, seems to loom closer and closer and closer. And at the same time, lots of them who are civil-minded or secular-minded are starting to worry that they don't have a lot of political participation or representation in the process, and quite possibly are not gaining the traction that they should be gaining based on the street movements themselves. Now, the remaining believers are starting to assume the role on the fringes of society, while more and more people basically vie for stability and limiting their losses. Many revolutionaries I've spoken to seem to be becoming more and more comfortable with voting with Amr Moussa, for example. Someone who last year would have been on the top of the list of the no-no candidates to ever vote for due to the fact that he was part of Mubarak regime for over 20 years. But in the light of not having any other options, in the light of the declining number of candidates it seems to be having, we're having more entertainment than people who watch Survivor at this point, because we basically lost Khaled al-Shater, Hazem Salah Abu Ismail, and Omar Suleiman, who weirdly enough were the top three big candidates, and they're the ones who basically had the traction. Instead, we're having this other array of other candidates who are semi-popular and who nobody truly and fully supports them, think they are the best option, with the exception with a few hardcore believers of Abu al-Futuh. But for example, very few people are actually excited about the notion of voting for Amr Moussa, specifically because Amr Moussa is the most wish-washy politician there is. And very few Muslim Brotherhood people are excited to vote for Morsi, for example, when you put them in front of Abu al-Futuh. And Abu al-Futuh, on the other hand, is causing lots of uncomfort because the revolutionaries on one side, half of them are unsure whether or not to vote for him. And on the other side, he just got endorsement from the Noor Salafi party, which isn't exactly putting him in quite the center position that he claims to represent. Now, back to the street protesters, I think that the last Abbasiyya protests were key indicators. Let me give you guys a background on what happened in Abbasiyya, basically. Abbasiyya is the area that has the Ministry of Defense. And there has been a bunch of times in which protests have actually gone there. And the last protest I've joined was the last Abbasiyya protest before this one, and it ended up in a musical standoff, if you can believe it or not. We have reached a point at where the security forces were standing, and blocking our gates. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, while people were chanting, suddenly out of nowhere, the army band started playing. Suddenly started hearing military marches. So of course the revolutionaries go like woo, and then they start singing ultras football songs or revolution songs. So, and they're trying to basically outchant the music, and that doesn't work out until someone comes from the back with a drum and starts banging from the revolutionary side, and the next thing you know, you're watching the movie Drumline, and you're thinking this whole thing has just turned insane. And it was a very interesting standoff. It was an artistic standoff. I'm not sure what it actually accomplished. But back in Abbasiyya, the people who started marching to Abbasiyya this time were the supporters of one Hazem Salah Abu Ismail. And their aim was to ensure that Hazem Salah Abu Ismail gets to run. Now, Hazem Salah Abu Ismail was a surprise to many people who were in the scene, who didn't pay attention to why this man was gaining as much traction as he is now. But it's actually, if you've been studying up, if you've been keeping tabs on him from the beginning, you would realize that Hazem Salah Abu Ismail is offering something that very few people are actually offering, which is an actual political project. You know, an Islamically minded young person, or any young person for that matter, goes in and he starts looking for a party or someone to support. The liberal parties are suffering from undefined or similar political projects that they can't seem to agree on. The socialist parties don't actually exist. I mean, not that they don't actually exist, but they haven't really modernized their rhetoric or narrative in any way. I mean, one big problem was having the Socialist Revolutionaries Party, you know, agree with the Egyptian Communist Party, and it was a big problem because one was Trotskyites and the other one was Leninist, and you just can't talk to those people, you know. And the disconnect that happens on that side from the left is actually one of the reasons why, even though there is a fantastically hotbed of leftism, at least ideology or attraction that could be gained, but they haven't been able to match the message with the population in any way, shape, or form, which is the issue that they're having. So Hazm Salah Abu Ismail basically offered a very interesting project, and his project can be divided into 3 sections. One part Islamism, one part revolution, and the other part, lots of talk about dignity and how we're going to stand up to the West. We're going to live with dignity. Sanahya Karaman is his actual slogan. And Sanahya Karaman is a slogan that he took from Abdel Nasser. And it's a very interesting idea because what he represents to the people is the idea of an Islamist Abdel Nasser. You know, those people, which is why it's very dangerous to have him around, and which is why he's not going to be gone for a while, even though he is eliminated thanks to our own birther controversy. Thankfully, his mom is American. Shame. But he's basically going to still be, you know, around, at least his movement is. Now, his supporters apparently went there without his consent, he claims, and started protesting, and the revolutionary socialists, you know, went and supported them, not because they necessarily support Hazm Salah Abu Ismail, but they are for anyone, you know, going there and protesting and freedom of speech and stuff like that. What ended up happening was clashes, and then the clashes called the other revolutionaries who are civic-minded, who didn't really want to support this, to go down and support the other people because, you know, everybody got guilted into it, and you always want to go to support your friends if they're there, you want them out of danger. And what was interesting about this time was, in this protest, there was a very interesting tent. And this tent had a group of, let's say, reportedly, of somewhat like Salafi or Jihadi population. They had weapons on them. Not only that, they seemed to be proficient in warfare, guerrilla warfare, and they would do raids inside the Abbasiyya neighborhood away from the process itself and scare the population. And they even had a little tent that anybody who disagreed with them or that they viewed as an Abbasiyya thug coming in, and it could be a simple Abbasiyya resident, they would take him inside the tent and beat him up or possibly, like, you know, do very bad things to him. And we had a situation which Ala Abdel Fattah, a very prominent activist, you know, went and wrote on a tweet, you know, that the revolutionaries are now carrying weapons. The revolutionaries. Which is an issue because usually you have such a tent every single time, and it's usually security forces, you know, infiltrating the camp, or some people who are insane. And if you are going to talk about this, you're not going to say the revolutionaries. You're going to say a group or an infiltrator or whatever. But because Ala said this, and the credibility he has, and the fact that he has 160,000 followers, it became a news item. And that news item became a way for people, mainly the SCAF or anti-revolutionary forces, to start advancing the story that now the revolutionaries are no longer peaceful and that they have guns and they want to go and storm in the MOD and, you know. And that's the thing. The moment the revolutionaries carry weapons, it becomes easy to label them as terrorists and therefore crack down on them, which is what ended up happening. And which is why lots of people end up attacking Ala Abdel Fattah for it, mainly because he was taken into custody for accusation that he was carrying weapons even though he wasn't back last year. So now it's an issue of that was a very stupid thing to do, and now you're going to have to actually fight that stigma. And that stigma is now sticking, which is not a good thing. And it ended up with about 400 people arrested, 200 people injured, a bunch of people died. But the story that got transmitted to the Egyptian public was that the people in Abbasiyya were, you know, almost terrorists. And the protesters at least. And at the same time, the Abbasiyya residents were very glad to see them gone because the protesters in general do not try to do any kind of community outreach with the people of the area that they go to, which is a big mistake, which is something I've rallied against for a long time. If you are going to go and occupy an area for a long time, you better have good relations with the surrounding area just as a matter of safety. or try not to inconvenience them if you're going to be there. And that doesn't happen. People have reached a level of radicalization and believe that, they're what's right, and, and it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks, to the point that they're actually losing the support of the same people that they actually claim to represent. Now, what ends up happening that for the street movement, that they still suffer from unclarity of demands. So they end up having demands that, when you actually ask them about it, doesn't make sense. They want to do the transfer of power now. But transfer of power to who? To the parliament, which is controlled by Muslim Brotherhood and Salafis. They want to see the kind of laws that they're actually presenting being controlled. If the problem with SCAF was that you have the executive and legislative powers in one branch, if you're doing this, you're repeating the actual performance. And then they say things like no constitution under military rule, or no presidential elections under military rule. Well, under whose rule? How are we going to do this? And this is the problem, that the demands a lot of times do not actually have practical applications or logical applications that can be sold to the people. And they come from a purely ideological standpoint that does not translate with the population. Now, it seems like that the street is again versus the elections. And they have good reasons to, because the parliamentary elections, there are lots of problems with them, and there was a lot of fraud, and they don't believe that any election that will come under military rule is actually going to be a clean and democratic one. But interestingly enough, that they are more concerned with ex-regime candidates than they are with the Muslim Brotherhood candidates. 6th of April goes and protests against Amr Moussa, it never goes and protests against Mohammed Morsi. Protesters are more concerned with Shafi and Moussa than Abu al-Futuh or Morsi or even Hazm Salah Abu Ismail, which in itself also shows the problem that they're very much stuck in the notion of the old game, which is the removal of every person has to do with the regime, instead of focusing on the new game, which is the new regime that is being formed that actually mimics the old regime, plus Islamism. Now, thankfully, there is a new generation coming, and the good thing and the bad thing about the revolution, I guess, well, it depends, how you look at it. Bad thing in terms of people who don't support the revolutionaries is that the messages have actually transferred itself to a younger generation of people, college students and high school students. And high school students were the biggest surprise. I mean, there used to be a group called Students for Reform. It was a reformist movement. They ended up getting started, they got about 40 applications. And it didn't gain much traction. They wanted to do inner reforms from inside the school, students 14 and 15 and 16-year-old for the educational system. But then they went and created something, Revolutionary Student Coalition, and within like one day they got about 30,000 applications. And this is growing. This is growing also in universities, lots of student movements in universities. So even if things calm down for this year, the next year, one does not foresee the student movement to stop or the revolutionary movement to stop over the next few years, primarily because they're not really resolving any of the issues. If the SCAF goes and eliminates all of us, if they kill me personally, that's not going to resolve the problems of Egypt, because the problems are real. The economy, the corruption is real. The bad economy is real. The lack of security is an issue. The way the security apparatus operates is an issue, and it's not going to go away if people actually just stop complaining about it. And it's the young people who actually are the vanguard of this, because they're the ones who's mostly invested in the country. They're the ones who are going to have to carry it for the next 20 or 30 years. And that goes true as well for the younger generation under 21. So that's continuing. So people say that the revolution continues. It's actually true. It's just not going to be the revolutionaries that have started it in any way, shape, or form, and quite possibly thank God for that. Because a lot of them have reached the wit's end with the public, and they are already figures that nobody wants to talk to. Now, you have the Islamists. Now, the Islamists can be divided into Muslim Brotherhood and Salafis. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood are losing popularity with the public, at least with the centrist public, who's starting to view them as liars, failures, and power-hungry. Now, the reason why they view them as they're actually, I would have to say, even though I personally very much dislike the Brotherhood or the Islamist movement, I'd have to say that characterization is sort of unfair, because there are very good reasons behind their actions so far. And there's also very unrealistic expectations to what comes to actually what they're capable of doing. Looking at them as failures for not being able to enact reform when they have very few powers inside the parliament, because there is no constitution that defines the parliament, which was the problem with the referendum to begin with. is, is slightly unfair. You cannot actually change things in Egypt within 2 months. That's actually not realistic. On the other hand, the reason why they had to basically demand the removal of the cabinet of Ganzouri, because the Ganzouri cabinet is spending money like drunken sailors. They've actually spent 130% of our budget so far. And the reason why they're doing this is because Kamalik Ganzouri is an old Filul person. So he is bound as hell to give them a cabinet that's completely broke by the time they get into power. And on the other hand, they had to actually field someone because the Abu Futuh candidacy was actually causing serious rifts within the actual organization. The Muslim Brotherhood is a flat structure. Every governorate operates in itself, and there is the coordination committee, which is the Irshad office. Now, the idea that Khaled Shatter comes in and wants to create it into a top-down hierarchical structure is a problem, because in order for you to do so, you need to put people who are your loyalists on top of every governorate, which is not the case. Not to mention, they're having an issue with, if they don't run someone, people will not follow their lead and they'll vote for Abu Futuh, at which point they will lose their control. And if they support Abu Futuh, then Abu Futuh has challenged the Irshad office and won, which is also a dangerous precedent for them. So they don't know what to do. So they're going to have to put in a candidate just to maintain cohesion and to maintain people staying in. And Khaled al-Shatter is out, so that leaves Morsi, and Morsi is just there in order for them to maintain the party line. Now, what do they actually want? What they actually want, 3 things basically. Well, a bunch of them, but mainly they want to solidify the powers of the parliament, ensure that it doesn't get dissolved. They want to transfer the majority of the powers to the prime minister, not to the president, and then they fully intend to bring in Khaled al-Shatter as the next prime minister, whether things happen or not. They want to actually follow the political model of Turkey in that sense, in which Gül is the president but has very little power, and Erdogan is the prime minister and he has full powers. Then quite possibly after 5 years, do the switcheroo and do like the Putin model, or what Erdogan is trying to do right now. Now, Noor Party, on the other hand, is actually playing it quite right, and it's actually setting itself up to gain huge popularity. The great danger against the Muslim Brotherhood is not coming from the liberals per se, but it's coming from the Noor Party. As the common wisdom usually states, whether it's in Somalia or elsewhere, if there is an Islamist party that goes into power, the street then belongs to a more extremist Islamist group. Gaza, for example, is starting to have the issue, Hamas, because the people who are firing rockets on Israel right now are this new generation of Salafi jihadists who organize themselves using internet and satellite connections and don't care. I have friends of mine in Gaza calling me, and they're telling me that now the imams inside Hamas-controlled mosques are talking about how we need to have forgiveness and how we need to pray to God for justice and not take justice in our own hands and stuff like that. So Hamas is already facing a serious issue with the rule being challenged in Gaza, and the same thing will start happening to the Muslim Brotherhood. Because having the Salafis, they're the only people who can actually out-Islamicize the Muslim Brotherhood and can actually call them infidels, which is why they're going to have to take a route that's more to the right than where they wish to be. Now, what we have right now is a situation where you have 2 top candidates, you have 2 Islamist candidates, and 1 liberal, secular, whatever candidate, and that's Amr Moussa. Now, and I'm not counting Shafiq, because even though he is gaining in the polls, we still don't know what's going to happen. We have the greatest elections ever. We have an election within like 2 weeks, and we have no clue who the front runner is. But so far, the math goes like this. If in the runoff it ends up being Morsi versus Amr Moussa, then whatever votes, centrist votes that was going to go to Abu Futuh is going to go towards Amr Moussa. And therefore, Amr Moussa will win against Morsi. However, if it is Abu Futuh versus Amr Moussa, then we're facing the very real possibility of Abu Futuh beating Amr Moussa, because Abu Futuh will then be able to gain the majority of the Islamist vote plus the centrist vote that believes in him versus Amr Moussa itself. Either way, or at least, unless of course the parliament gets, absolved, and then you have a whole new mess on your hand. But either way, the choice is between, as Douglas Adams said, it's between 3 lizards. People are going to vote for 1 lizard so that the other lizard doesn't win. Nobody actually believes in any of them. Now, what we have is the SCAF. Lots of the talk about the SCAF and lots of the talk that SCAF has in Washington is about how tired they are and how exhausted they are and how they wish they would just leave power and it's not a picnic. Well, you know, nobody's talking about a safe exit for SCAF anymore because they're talking more about safe stay. You know, they want to maintain their positions and they want to stay and they don't want to, and they want immunity. And there comes by the point of political compromise versus revolutionary rhetoric. Revolutionary rhetoric, of course, says, no, they get out, and then we try them. Political compromise deals with it from the notion of, you catch a thief in your house, and he has, you know, stolen lots of your stuff. If you block him from escaping, very good chance of him killing you. If you get away, get out of the way, he has a chance to run away with all your belongings. What you want to do is give them an exit, but not an exit that would allow them to walk away with everything that they want, as the thief would want. And this way minimize your loss. And that's exactly the kind of rhetoric that's happening with the SCAF. What the SCAF want, basically, that they're going to get, no matter what the political leadership says, mainly because power at the end of the day comes from having an organized group that has weapons with them, and SCAF have all the weapons. End of story. If they want special status, they're going to get a special status. That's what's going to end up happening. Because unlike all the rhetoric that people have been saying since last year, that we're facing something closer to the Turkey model, in reality we're facing something closer to the Pakistan model, in which you're going to have somewhat of a functioning democracy, you know, with the military and the security services having allegiances to no one and only themselves and doing anything that they want. Now, we're having an issue with three things. The first one, the Constitution. SCAF has announced, have met with all the party leaders and told them that they better have a constitution ready by the 30th of June, or else they're going to be very unhappy with what's going to happen. Now, the idea of actually writing a constitution by that time, specifically the people haven't even agreed on who is going to be in the constitutional committee to write it, is an issue. So that makes people think about having temporary constitutions so we can give ourselves the time necessary to write a constitution ourselves. And am I running out of time?
Keep going, you're doing fine.
All right, okay. So you have...
Maybe in the cosmic sense. But...
In the cosmic sense? All right, thank you. So you have basically two options that people are talking about right now. One is changing the constitutional declaration, you know, to fit the president for the next, at least until they finish the constitution. And it's an appealing idea, technically, because it limits the executive powers of the president compared to any other constitution that was there before. But on the other hand, in order for them to do so, they're going to have to change the constitutional declaration because it does not mention the president in any way, shape, or form. It mentions the SCAF being the executive power. The other option is to use the 1971 Constitution, you know, as basis for a temporary constitution to go on. And this actually legally is the most viable option because I spoke to many people who are, you know, constitutional experts, and they informed me that the 1971 Constitution, due to the referendum, never actually went away. And that legally speaking, the constitutional declaration that the SCAF has used to actually enforce their power is illegal because the referendum wasn't 1971 Constitution. You know, and then they did not survive that and said the issued constitutional declaration that would have them in power because nothing in the 1971 Constitution gives them the power to rule. So any lawyer, any stupid lawyer with 50 Egyptian pounds can go and file a lawsuit, you know, and declare the constitutional declaration illegal and reinstating 1971 Constitution, and it would be something that people would have until, you know, you end up writing your own constitution. The problem is the unchecked powers that the 1971 Constitution gives the president on one side. The other side is which 1971 Constitution? Are we talking about the last one, basically, the one with the 2007 amendments? Are we talking about the one in the 1980s that has established Islam as the official religion and Sharia as the primary source of legislation? Or the 1971 one, which was mainly secular, but also decides that Egypt is a socialist country as well? Nobody knows. The chances are they would go with the 1971 latest version, which is also problematic, but could be a compromise for everybody involved until they actually write a new constitution. The issue is, as well, is that SCAF are not diabolical or conspirational as much as their opposition is stupid. They have been unable to actually effectively challenge them where they should be or co-opt them in any way, shape, or form. And it's very frustrating to see this on the political level and on the revolutionary level, because it highlights the biggest problem that we've had, which is that our intelligentsia, our elites, are not exactly fit for power. There is a reason why a lot of Egyptians got very excited over the Omar Suleiman candidacy, because after the revolution they expected the Egyptian elites and intelligentsia to take over, but they had no actual connections with the ground, and they're fantastic TV show hosts, but they can't run anything. Which is, none of them have run an organization or a ministry or anything. None of them have been tried. So it's easy for them to talk, but it's very hard for them to actually do. And finally, there's the question of the transfer of power scenario. What does transfer of power mean for SCAF? Because let's face it, they own 40% of the economy, they own 100% of the land, and they have all the guns. And they're supposed to actually follow whatever civil leadership comes in because that's what's right. The question for them is not going to happen this way. They don't need to. They've been in control for 60 years. And nobody will actually go against them. Egypt is not a country in which a civil war would actually take place. We're very much against that kind of notion. We might have sectarian conflict, burn a couple of churches every now and then, that's about it. But an actual civil war, it would end in 3-4 days. The revolution was such a huge deal because it lasted for 18 days. That was the amount of psychological pressure that put on the regular Egyptian is nobody has ever talked about this or measured it. Finally, we have the issue of Sinai and counterterrorism. Sinai is becoming a problem, specifically northern Sinai, and it's becoming a problem for everybody involved. Mainly because the Bedouin gangs in northern Sinai, besides giving refuge to lots of Islamist or jihadi terrorist groups, they also have been engaging in the worst kind of organ theft that you can even imagine. Basically, lots of the refugees coming in from Eritrea and Sudan, trying to get into Israel, they got intercepted. They're supposed to be gone through by the Bedouins. The Bedouins grabbed them, especially the Sawerka Bedouin clan. They grab them, they demand more money from their relatives, and they have them work without food or shelter, and when they die, they basically harvest their organs. And nobody talks about this, because nobody ever wants to get into northern Sinai. And mainly because there is no security forces that are able to control northern Sinai due to the Camp David Agreement. The Camp David Agreement does not allow the Egyptian army the ability to actually go and establish strong presence into the Sinai Peninsula. And one of the demands of the revolution have been that we need to change that, primarily so that we can even be held responsible for the actions that happened there. I mean, after 35 years, it's pretty clear that the Egyptian military does not want war with Israel. Actually, I've been arguing so far that the greatest moment, the most glorious moment in the Egyptian military's history is not the 1973 victory, but more the 1978 Camp David Agreement, because that's the moment when they believe they have tricked the Israelis, they have tricked the Americans, they have tricked the Soviets, they'll never have to work again, and they're going to get paid every year. Glorious moment. Which is why, the revolution has been such a headache for them, because, suddenly the Egyptian army has to actually go down and fight and do exercises, and they're not used to this. It's not the way they like to roll, basically. So they're not happy, yes. Which finally leaves the liberal parties. At the current state, you have about 4 parties that could be considered liberal. You have the FEP, which is the one I'm in, and Naguib Sawiris actually is the founder. The Wafd Party, the Social Democrats Party, and the Al Adla Party. Al Adla Party flirts with being centrist, kind of on the Islamist side, but not really, because the people who fund it and who control it are not Islamists at all. So the problem lies that the Wafd Party, which is the oldest liberal secular party, has denounced secularism last year, and is very much sort of aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood. The Social Democrats Party suffers from schizophrenia because it's controlled by liberal, I mean classical liberal, by the way, like, center-right. Because they have center-right people, and then they have extreme left people, and they can't figure out what they want to do half of the time. We went into a coalition with them in the elections, it ended up blowing in all our faces, basically, because we looked at them as symbols, and they looked at us as money bags, and that's not the kind of coalition that you want to end up having. So there's been lots of talk of unity, basically unifying all the parties together. But there is an impossibility in such unity. WAFD is not interested in unity with anyone because Said al-Badawi, its leader, does not want to share power. Al-Adl wants to join other party, and there are talks between them and the FEP and talks between them and the Dastur. Nobody wants to get into an alliance with the Egyptian Social Democrats Party ever again. And they're very much becoming a pariah party, and within the 3-4 years, coming next election, they're not going to be able to challenge, to face the challenge because they will not have the money or the financing, and the new Baradei party would actually eliminate them. Which brings us to the Baradei party. Now, it sounds great, Baradei party. But, Baradei goes in, he decides finally, after all elections are done, he's going to create a party. And in order to add humor to the measure, he decides to call it the Dastur Party, the Constitution Party, even though he's not going to partake in writing Constitution in any way, shape, or form, because it requires you to actually have gone through the elections and had MPs inside the parliament. But the problem is that people have been so disheartened, lots of people have been so disheartened, lots of people are such ardent Baradei supporters that they very much will follow this man anywhere. To my own surprise, personally, because the Baradei presidential campaign did not involve Baradei actually doing anything. It was the people who did the campaign doing all the work for him while he stayed at home, and they go to him and be like, did we do well? And he would be like, fantastic, and then they would just leave. That's all he did. And from last year, I had a bet with other MP right now, it's called Mustafa Nagar, that Baradei is not going to actually run for parliament, not for president. Like, we bet that he was actually going to withdraw from all the way last year, primarily because not because the game is rigged, even though it is, and not because it's a sham, even though it is, but mainly because Baradei is very much against leaving his house in Garana, in the outskirts of Cairo. When he actually announced the start of his campaign, he had people coming from all over Cairo travel to this outskirts suburb to a country club, so he can start his campaign, which isn't exactly where you want to start your campaign. You want to start your campaign in central Cairo somewhere, show that you're not an elitist person who doesn't know what the people are doing. So the challenges facing them are primarily two things, and they're challenges that have faced every other party, like the FEP party. The challenges are twofold. One of them has to do with the grassroots organizational structure, and the other one has to do with the political leadership. The organizational structure is a problem because the moment you have a party that has lots of support, lots of people want to come and join it, like the FEP, you immediately have a problem absorbing them, especially if a newly startup party. We end up having 120,000 applications. In order for you to effectively coordinate 120,000 people, you need one coordinator for every 20 people. You need one supervisor for every 10 coordinators, and you need one manager for every 10 supervisors. So that's about 7,000 people just to coordinate the people. If you give every single one of them 1,000 Egyptian pounds a month, that's 7 million every month. Huge amount of money. That's not even counting people who are going to work in media or outreach or whatever. Not to mention, it becomes a problem even to figure out how to do the financing, because a lot of people will not give you money, but they'll give you services. Someone will come to you and be like, I will print big ads for you, in this district. So if you don't have the platform ready so that you can actually send this person to the right contact person has to do with this district, you will lose this person. And people in Egypt are fickle. So if you don't call them within the first 2 weeks of them coming to join, they start complaining and they start believing that your party is a mess like everybody else, and they no longer want to believe in you, and this is the issue that we faced. The other issue that you face is the political leadership. The 100 people group that actually have created the Baradei's Political Leadership Council are also the same intelligentsia people that haven't been able to do anything for the past year and a half. And very few of them actually have party experience or leadership issues. So what's going to end up happening is that all of them, TV personalities, they'll all want to be on TV. And every single one of them is not going to be able to reconcile his image, and his principles versus what needs to be done on the ground to win elections. Because principles are nice, but when you're facing elections, especially like people like the Muslim Brotherhood or the Salafis, sometimes you have to compromise. So what does the future hold for liberals? Well, it completely depends. Are they going to be able to get their act together? Possibly. The FEP is heading in that direction, trying to get as many people to unify as possible and coordinate with the Baradei party and other people as well. If al-Baradi actually manages to get his party off the ground, we will applaud it. We would not mind having a strong liberal party, even if it's not us, as long as somebody's fighting the fight. And it all depends if we actually get to get our basically shit together and manage to present, our political project in a way that actually resonates with the Egyptian population, which is something we're working on right now. Problem is, we haven't been able to do so because we were thrust into election after inception with 3 months. On 27 governorates, it's an impossible feat. And we've been dealing with the aftermath of that ever since. Right now, we've just almost resolved all our operational issues, so now it's time for us to grow, and this is game time, whether actually we're going to accomplish something or not. It's also going to depend whether support for Amr Moussa will ensure liberalism in Egypt. Problem with Amr Moussa, again, he has no clear positions on anything. He's not a fighter for liberalism or a fighter for civil rights. He is going to play with all the cards. So whether or not that's actually going to be good for us or not, who knows? Because he only wants to run for 1 term. He doesn't care after that. So we could end up having a so-called liberal president where nothing actually happens in the country, and then that actually reflects badly on liberal parties after that, especially those who support him. And finally, there is the US support for liberals, which doesn't exist. So far, the US policy on Egypt has been a no policy. Everybody is very much worried about Israel, everybody much worried about Islamism. Nobody wants to help us, nobody supports us, nobody does anything. God knows, we don't even know how they would like that support to happen, but we haven't seen any kind of support, and even the kind of people they come and talk to, like the administration or the senators, they all go and meet with the Muslim Brotherhood. None of them comes and meets with us, which is very weird, because technically we're the friendly people. Technically. So who knows? When it comes to democracy promotion in Egypt, the way they used to do it, I'm not sure it's the best idea to continue doing so, mainly because that it's just like Israel. It's an issue that whatever person in the administration will use in order to get something else from the US administration. They know you care about democracy promotion, they know they care about Israel, and they're going to try to milk this as much as possible. But in reality, whoever the president is going to come, probably not going to be very much caring about democracy promotion, because on one aspect, they don't want the rule challenged anyway, and they probably want to establish themselves as the new Mubarak, even though that will never happen. And primarily because it's in their best interest to milk you guys for as much as possible, and if there's going to be $800 million that goes to democracy promotion that instead can go into the economy or the military, well, give us that money instead. So I have an idea of what to do with democracy promotion activities, but let's just start the question and answer because I've talked for too long.
Thank you very much. Just to let you know, we don't have that 5-second delay for expletives, so...
I'm sorry. Did I use a lot?
No, just one. One person who I don't know just tweeted here and said, "The complexity of the issues facing Egypt currently being outlined by Sandmonkey will make your head explode." I think that's a bit of an understatement.
I'm sorry. I didn't do it.
No. I think it's no. You didn't tweet. That's for sure. Yeah. I think you really quite helpfully outlined an enormously complex situation. Let me try to ask you a couple of large questions, and then people can take this into some more level of detail. The way I interpreted what you said is that when the dust settles after the presidential election, whatever happens, there will be split government. Mm-hmm. Namely, that the Muslim Brotherhood candidate Morsi is unlikely to win, and
yes.
that the scenarios you outline are either Moussa versus Morsi, in which Moussa wins, or Moussa versus Abdel Fattah, in which Abdel Fattah wins.
Yes.
That's what you... So, in either case, there'll be split government, in which you have a large majority in parliament, which is Islamist, mm-hmm. Muslim Brotherhood and Noor, and then a president who is neither of those,
Actually, Abu al-Futuh is supported by the Noor party.
Correct, but
and he's an Islamist. So,
well, that's where I'm heading here. Is trying to figure out, but a president who is neither formally a member of the Muslim Brotherhood at the moment, nor a member of the Noor party at the moment, and then you have SCAF or the military out there. So when you think of this sort of triumvirate of split, in which a split government will emerge, where do you focus as the principal repository of power, and how do you see this trilateral relationship? How will decisions be made on the key issues of the pace of Islamization of society, of the substance of economic reform, of the international orientation? These, I guess, three basic issues. I mean, how will the relative weight of these three, presidency, military, parliament, how will the relative weight play itself out?
Mainly, the military will have a say when it comes to some issues in foreign affairs, but they're gonna try to remain behind the scenes as much as possible. The regime that was before was a military regime, and the reason why the military went and had a deal with the Muslim Brotherhood from the beginning is because they just need a new face. It's always the case. The Supreme Council of Armed Forces is kind of like the board of directors of the Company of Egypt. Mubarak was the CEO. If people remove the CEO, that doesn't mean that the board of directors will be removed. We'll just simply get a new CEO who will ensure that the things that they care about continue to operate, and then who does whatever else that they want. But the question is, it's not about decisions being made, it's about execution. And none of the people who are going to be in power be able to execute anything. I mean, the ministers do not have the power to enforce, the rule on everybody that comes under them, especially if you end up with a parliamentary system, because that just means that whoever the minister is, it can be removed in any shakeup. So there's no point in actually, listening to them. The reason why there was no security reform in place is because none of the interior ministers were actually in power for more than 3 or 4 or 5 months, and none of them had the political capital to actually enforce their will. So the issue becomes whether or not the government will actually be able to govern, which is the main issue that nobody actually talks about, So we have that, and we have SCAF, and then we have the Islamists. And the Islamists will try to consolidate their power as much as possible, but the consolidation of power will also be equaled with opposition from the population. One of the things that we've been very clear about as the FEP is that we have no desire to actually be in the cabinet. Because whoever is going to be in the cabinet for the next 4 years is going to be held responsible by the electorate for the economic conditions that the country is going to be in, the security conditions the country is going to be in, everything. So politically beneficial, it's better for us to wait out those 4 years, because the economy is not going to improve, because the international economy is not improving. So there's no one to bail us out, even if we needed a bailout. So either way, the curve anticipates that the economy will start picking up around 2017, which means that we better be prepared to go in for 2016's elections and be in the cabinet then, which is what we're actually aiming to do. Because then when you actually have the conditions conducive to actually impact any kind of change or economic policies. Economic policies-wise, we are moving towards a more capitalist society, whether I like it or not. When we first did the coalition between us, the liberals, and the socialists, lots of the socialists refused to come with us because, our economic policies are capitalist. And we're like, dude, freedoms and rights. Let's focus freedoms and rights, and then we'll talk about the economic position later. Because let's face it, you guys have all the labor strikes that you want, and usually when you have a strike, we end up listening because we're businessmen, we just want things to go. So we're just gonna, abscond to you. But instead, the Islamists came in, no freedoms and rights, and more capitalist than any liberal party in Egypt. So in that sense, we're gonna be pro-business. In a way that actually makes the Mubarak regime look like, a socialist endeavor, basically.
Just on that point, how do you think the new regime will balance what you're suggesting as a pro-business capitalist orientation with this mass public demand for social justice and quick economic improvement?
And they won't be able to. However, the question also comes from the definition of social justice. everybody supports social justice, nobody can actually tell you what it means. Because for liberals, social justice is one thing. For the revolutionary socialists, social justice is another thing. For, the communists, social justice is a different thing. For the Islamists, it's very much, charity work, basically. And, providing civil services to people on the ground in terms of food and drinks. I used to joke that the chant for the revolution was bread, freedom, and social justice. And when it came down to the elections, the leftists went and said social justice, the liberals went and said freedoms, and the Islamists gave people bread, which is what they want. So, basically, that's the issue.
Okay, well, let's build on this opening set of remarks and questions, and turn to you, and then I'll bring in some of the questions that people are tweeting here from around the world. We'll start right here, and if you could identify yourself and use a mic, that'd be great.
Thank you so much. I'm Laura Schultz from USAID.
Hi,
Thank you
Laura.
for your presentation and very compelling remarks. I was wondering if you could speak a bit to the broader context in which these developments are taking place, the overall rule of law environment in Egypt right now. I was struck when I was there in February. There's been, a lot of breakdowns at a macro level and on a very micro level, violence and absence of the police and such. And what is your current assessment of that? Are there things that can be done in the short term to kind of elevate a sense of rule of law? And how concerned are you about the current situation in that regard?
Like every single person in Egypt, I'm very concerned. But also my concern is slightly exaggerated. We are comparing the current crime situation to what it used to be the days of the Mubarak regime, which was unnaturally safe, in a way, supernaturally safe. And it was supernaturally safe because we had a police force that did not believe in the law. They weren't trained they weren't trained in crime solving or whatever. They just relied heavily on fear all the time. And the more people became less afraid of them, the more brutal they became. That's when they started producing the torture videos to scare more of population. We can do this. That's when they went out of Khalid Said and killed them to show that they can do this. The problem with security right now is that people are no longer afraid. So if you're used to a mode of operation which people actually feared and respected you, and they no longer do, you actually have to actually do work. And thereby comes the other issue. When it comes down to it, as much as we have huge amount of people in the MOI, the people who are actually on the street, resolving crime, are people with first lieutenant and captain degrees. We have a military structure, so it goes all the way to general. And anyone who goes into major gets a desk job, and anybody who is second lieutenant is not considered is a rookie, so he's not supposed to go out on the street. So it's basically the 2008-2009 classes of the MOI, and so far they've had over 2,000 either dead or injured for the past 2 years, which makes them very reluctant to put themselves in any dangerous position, because if they go and they face a dangerous situation and they end up injuring or killing someone, everybody goes and attacks the police, because of their reputation. So they don't want to put themselves in danger because nobody will cry over them, any way, shape, or form. Not to mention the implementation of law. Egyptian laws are insane. They didn't use them because they didn't make any sense. For example, if I killed someone, I could possibly get the death sentence. But if I kill a police officer, that means I am actually trying to overthrow the regime, and that's a 5-year sentence. So if I'm arrested by a police officer, for any crime, I can just get out, and it could take me 20 years. I can get out and kill him, and then just get off in 5 years instead of 20. If I'm arrested with a gun, that's a 1,000-pound bail and I'm out. If I'm arrested with a machine gun, that's a 20,000 bail and I'm out. A friend of mine arrested someone who actually robbed him in the street. And the law stipulates that if you take them into the police station, they just have to take his statements, and then he can actually leave if he can pay the bail. So the issue is that we already had a legal framework that does not make sense, and which is why nobody had used it, and nobody talked about changing that legal framework. And anybody who talked about changing the legal framework has done it from the Islamist side in sort of some fantasy that you can somehow legislate Sharia to fight crime, which is which is why, personally speaking, that's why I'm not really afraid of Sharia legalization or trying to put them in a legal term, because in practical reality, it fails. I mean, civil law is very strict when it comes to it. There are no conditions in civil law, but in Sharia there are conditions. So if I go and rob you, under civil law, I'm a thief. But if I go and rob you and under Sharia law, I'm hungry. Well, not only am I not to be punished, but according to Sharia, you're actually responsible for feeding me from now on. If you're running out, the haraba law that they did, the North Party solution for crime. Haraba means going to war against the Prophet and his people, and it relates to people actually attacking trade caravans days of the Prophet. Now, the thing with Haraba is only in the protected roads does it apply, and the unprotected roads it doesn't apply. Which street in Egypt now can be called a protected road? There isn't one. Not to mention, if you're walking with gold, for example, that's apparent, then you have actually invited theft on yourself. Nobody walks with gold, but what about the Mercedes? It all comes down. Not to mention that always go back to the concept of whether humans have free will or not, because, according to Islam, everything is predetermined. So if you commit a crime, then maybe that was God's will, so I'm not really responsible. And those are the issues that basically Islam has struggled with for years, whether free will, actually exists, and whether, the Quran is a creation or part of the Creator, if it's a creation or eternal. Because if it's eternal, then everything in it has to be taken into consideration, even contradictory statements. Alcohol, for example. One verse in the Quran says, do not touch alcohol before, after dinner prayers. The other verse says, do not touch alcohol at all. If it's a creation and therefore everything counts, then both of them are actually true. If it's eternal, I mean. If it's a creation, then you can say, no, the latter one is the one that we should take into consideration. Which is why, for example, the Muslim Brotherhood have been very much against the Noor Party trying to put the words judgments of Sharia instead of the principles of Sharia in the Constitution. Because the principles of Sharia, you can just throw in there, justice by equality, whatever, talking points. But judgments, that's 2,000 years almost of Islamic fiqh and schools and hadith, and which means any law that comes out, if you want to compare it to the Constitution, you actually cannot compare it to the Constitution, you have to compare it to 2,000 years of Sharia school, which in itself is not really going to work out. Which is why it's going to be really hilarious to see them trying to legislate Sharia, personally speaking, because it's not going to work out.
Just to put this, your final comment in a U.S. policy sense, just this week, congressional negotiators inserted conditionality on U.S. aid to Egypt, which would require certification that Egypt is abiding by rule of law. Now, you're saying, on the one hand, that is probably a bad idea because the law itself is often stupid. And secondly, one of the implications would be the United States might get itself having to certify a certain type of implementation of Sharia law.
That would be incredibly funny.
Which would be an interesting turn of events. Let's continue. Yes, Hillel Fradkin in the center.
Thanks, Hillel Fradkin of the Hudson Institute, and I too want to thank you for your remarks. The question I want to ask is a follow-on to the answer you gave to Rob's original question about governance. Your answers presuppose that this will just sort of go along in paralysis until the next elections, in which the platform your party is offering will triumph overall, and that presupposes that no one is people are going to accept a situation in which, for the next 6 months, for the next year, 2 years, nothing actually gets done. Is that really plausible, or isn't it more plausible that, in fact, the incapacity of anyone to reach a decision, to an effective decision, will lead to some further development in the politics?
Well, it all depends, I guess, as well on what's going to happen in municipal elections, which is, the local elections, city and council elections that happens on the ground. Because the root of corruption in the Egyptian government happens on that level. Now, everybody's gearing up for it. Nobody knows when it's going to be or how actually they're going to, implement anything. The issue leads to the idea that you don't have people who actually have data. Our biggest problem is data. everybody can theoretically speak about the problem, and nobody actually has gotten their hands dirty into the problem to implement their solution, see if they actually work. So whether or not there's going to be dissatisfaction, there is going to be dissatisfaction. Whether or not there is going to be protest, there is going to be protest against it. However, the Mubarak regime has managed to make corruption our culture for so long that it kind of became the de facto method of governance in Egypt. And everybody knows the system, and everybody operates within the system, which is the problem of actually removing corruption. Whether or not people would actually want the corruption removed remains to be debated. Because it actually gets a lot of things done faster than the way they're actually being done. Now, it's going to be up to whoever is going to be in power to try to limit corruption as much as possible and try to actually streamline or create a better form of operation. And again, as I said, it remains to be seen because who knows? The verdict on the parliament, whether or not it's going to be resolved, is coming in 30 days. So if they absolve parliament, then you're facing a situation in which you have no parliament, and therefore no constitution committee, and nothing, and you're back to square one. At which point there's going to be a new election, and who knows what the new parliament would then look like, or the new makeup of it. But it's highly doubtful it will be 77% Islamists. Again, because people have tried them, and as fickle as Egyptian voters are, they might just vote them out. Who knows? But whether or not they're going to actually enact change, I think the process is going to be very slow and very painful, especially if the economic situation worsens. So I'm not saying that in 4 years we will take power and everything is going to be dandy. I'm saying is when it comes to the economics, it's kind of hard to push for reforms when people are hungry. Lots of the corruption happens because people are giving salaries that wouldn't allow them to survive a day. And therefore they actually start accepting bribes and actually doing things a different way. And, it all comes down to poverty. So any kind of reform in Egypt, in order for it to actually take place, it has to deal with the issue of poverty first.
In terms of poverty, one question via Twitter asks, how would a new regime address the problems of youth unemployment if indeed that is a high priority on the agenda of a new government?
How would they be able to do it?
How would they be able to do it?
Oh, man. Why don't you ask me to solve the Middle East problem? Oh, no. Actually, I guess the ready-made capitalist answer is true support for small and medium enterprises. In reality is the government is not going to be able to hire any more people. We're facing a problem of having one of the biggest... nothing compared to Greece, of course, but, we basically have lots of employees in the government. And they don't do anything. It comes from a time in which Egypt was still socialist, and in order for them to, claim that they're facing unemployment, they would just hire people that they don't need. There's this little fact about, the accounting department in the railroad company in Egypt. The accounting department in the railroad company in Egypt employs 50,000 people. Now, that's 50,000 accountants. Now, the issue is, what do you do with them? If you remove... if you need 200 people and you remove 49,800 employees, you're going to have 49,800 employees with their families, going against you, claiming that you're engaging in war against the poor. And that is the issue. Lots of proposals have been actually offered as well in terms of creating new industries, basically, trying to attempt to create new industries. There are lots of things in Egypt that are very underdeveloped. But... for example, we don't have a viable sports industry, and that's a huge thing, for example. That's not even a good solution, but, we still haven't really reached the tourism industry to its full potential. That's 23% of the economy that has been stagnant. One proposal that we've offered is to stop allowing the military from hiring people using the slave wage that they give them in the military when they recruits. They basically have conscripts working in military, factories. In Egypt, the military-industrial complex is one thing. Actually, the military has its own industrial complex that they control. And they're able to make huge profits because they can hire people for 30 Egyptian pounds a month, which is what they pay conscripts. Now, if you actually try to push for that and have them either pay those people the minimum wage or hire people with the minimum wage, you have effectively created about 1 million jobs. So there are different ways to do it and different approaches, but nobody has a silver bullet so far, mainly because nobody understands how the economic landscape will look like for the next 4 to 5 years, and you need to do so in order to actually effectively create solutions.
Yes, on the right here, please.
Hi, Zach Gold from Brookings. Thanks so much for speaking with us today. I want to go back to one of your original points about the Revolutionary Street and their support for presidential candidates. And you said that they were sort of split for Abdul Manam Abdul Fattah from the beginning, and then now, obviously, it shows how much of an Islamist he is that he's been able to get the support of Noor and Salafi call. And I was wondering if that actually pulled revolutionary youth away from him, or were those who didn't trust his Islamist leanings already, part of that split that didn't support him?
Maho, here's the thing. For example, today I woke up and I found that lots of my friends are supporting Hamdin Sabbahi, who's a Nasserite, leftist candidate, and this has been one of my arguments with the other revolutionaries, especially the leaders, which is when you're dealing with elections, what you need to do is you need to have, if revolutionaries are a voter bloc, you need to have a group that will go and actually negotiate, with the different candidates and see which one would actually get you the things that you want. Instead, they're all aiming to basically throw their vote behind the candidate without actually talking to them or ensuring that they're actually going to accomplish, what they asked for. And then you have friends fighting over which candidate is more revolutionary than the other, which is the most retarded thing I've seen. It's as if they need more infighting and more division. And especially that some of the candidates are symbolic candidates, like Khalid Ali, for example. Khalid Ali could not get 15,000 letters of agency. Mr. Lawyer of the Labor and couldn't get it, couldn't 15,000. And he had to, and yet somehow, because his group knows lots of media contacts, he's featured, lots of interviews with the aim of creating a symbol out of him, because that's what the Egyptian left does. It knows it will never win an election, so it creates symbols so that any coming government will actually take one of them and puts them in a cabinet position. And he's the young guy, so naturally they'll take him. But that kind of fighting is stupid, because for me, if I'm going to choose a symbolic candidate, I would have voted for Busaina Kamil, was at least a woman. If I'm going to vote for Khalid Ali, what am I doing? Voting for a young candidate, he's still a man. You're not really breaking new ground in reality. So, no, the issue is, again, there's amateurness in it. And it sucks, because there's huge creativity, and I'm sorry. Sorry. I apologize. Expletive deleted. And it sucks because it's there's huge energy and huge creativity within the revolutionary forces, and if they actually come together and actually do something together, they might actually do an effective campaign. But even when it came to the parliamentary elections, half of them were separated over whether or not to boycott or not to boycott, and so it's not a matter of leadership. It's a matter of if you can actually get them to, get their priorities straight. And since a big contingent of them are anarchists to begin with, talking to them about any kind of political gain is, whatever. Trying to set fire to the rain, as Adele says, whatever. So.
Yes, all the way in the back.
Stuart Sloan from the AJIRI, the American Jewish International Relations Institute. I have two questions. One is with respect to the U.S. military aid. This might explain the American decision. How much do you know of what percentage of that aid is committed to fulfilling contracts with American companies which wouldn't get paid for the equipment if the U.S. government suspended the aid? The second question is, could you elaborate on what happened with the NGO issue? Was a woman minister who ostensibly made those decisions retro from the Mubarak administration? Did she have the power? Who backed her? Why was she allowed to do this?
All right. The first issue relates to the military aid to Egypt. And you are right. If the U.S. ever cuts military aid to Egypt, then lots of the Egyptian, U.S. weapons that they bought from the U.S. wouldn't be functional within 6 months, 1 year, because nobody would do the maintenance for it. However, the U.S. will never cut the military aid to Egypt because it's a way of actually maintaining ties, specifically when it comes to the issues of preferential treatment at the Suez Canal and, when it comes to Israel. So it's one of those things in which there's lots of talk about it, but in reality, in Capitol Hill, it will never happen. Nobody is willing to go on that route at all. Not even any of the two hopefuls are going in, whether it's Romney or Obama. And I've spoken to people from both of their foreign policy teams. So it's a weird thing because it's one of those issues that always get brought up but never actually lead to anything. The second question was in relations to Faiza Bunnaga. Now, Faiza Bunnaga is remnant from the Mubarak regime, and she used to belong to the group of Tantawi from the beginning. The group of Tantawi included her, I think, the Ministry of Petroleum, what's his name, Samah Fahmi, Al-Ash'al, and Faiza Bunnaga. And Faiza Bunnaga from day one is very much the person who's trying to stall NGO work in Egypt from Mubarak regime days. Now, there is an issue that a lot of money got thrown inside of Egypt by governments and to NGOs that never actually did anything. A lot of that money ended up getting funneled outside of the country as well because of those NGO people. They didn't really have active NGOs and they were basically con artists and everybody just wanted the money to go in. But in terms of the ones that we're talking about, whether it's IRI or NDI, the issue, they are not even the issue. They're trying to discredit other Egyptian NGOs that were actually doing the work. And what better way to actually discredit them than to throw in the American NGOs into the game and claim that the NGOs are basically like, US agents and they're the ones who are trying to destroy Egypt. And this happened because there was a study that was done about why revolutions fail. One of the main principles of it was that civil society cannot be part of the revolution. It has to remain neutral. And civil society in Egypt and the NGOs in Egypt became an active participant and promoters of the revolution in itself, which basically meant that their role, immediately became suspect. But when it came down to IRI and NDI, I personally believe that they just went for them because, number one, it allowed them to paint the other Egyptian NGOs, some of them doing great work like EIPR or the Center for Judiciary Review, as foreign agents with them. At the same time, it gave the administration leverage over increased aid later on, and of trying to stop U.S. democracy promotion activities in the country, because the military naturally, did not like what happened with Mubarak or the revolution. And they recognized that a lot of it had to do with democracy promotion, or quite possibly could be related to democracy promotion, and anything that could go in that direction, they're completely against. So it was a negotiational tactic, beginning to end. And Faiza Bunnaga is the de facto prime minister of the government because she's the only minister that hasn't been changed in any of the governments that actually happened, which is why she's the one who always goes and talks publicly about them. So,
let me ask you about the aid relationship, but not so much your assessment of our Congress, but more your assessment of what the new leadership in Egypt would be looking for. I mean, the aid relationship is defined for the Mubarak era, and it reflects the Mubarak era priorities as defined mutually by the Egyptians and by us. One has to assume that that in the new era, however it turns out, those priorities will change, certainly from the Egyptian side. Maybe they're the same from our side, but from the Egyptian side, one would anticipate that they'd be different. So, in what way do you expect them to be different, or do you expect the new leadership merely to defer to the military totally on this issue?
I think that they're going to definitely maintain the military aid, if not try to increase it slightly. I think they're going to argue that economic aid is more important than any other kind of aid. And they're going to actually start demanding that the U.S. forgoes the idea of democratic aid and transfer it more into economic aid due to the economic conditions of the country. At the same time, as I told you, Robert, one actually anticipates that the moment there is a president to Egypt, every Western countries and America, won't be an exception here, they'll actually start throwing money in our way because everybody wants to, have good relations with the new boss who's in charge. If the aid relation was actually, categorized by the Mubarak era, then a new dynamic has to be established for whoever the new president will be. And what better way to show that people are friends with you than to give you money?
And so, just to make sure that everyone here understands this, you're saying that you expect that the new leadership in Egypt will want a new layer of aid on top of the existing layer of aid.
I'm saying that they will receive it.
Not just expect it.
No, they will receive it. It's not even, يعني لا, they will receive it. It's,
I have a few congressmen for you to meet.
all right.
Yes, Mike Sponder up front. Wait, there's a mic. Wait, just 1 second. Mike.
Building on that, and that was going to be one of my original ones. If they get the aid, is that going to stave off your doomsday scenario of economic doom? Because by and large, the aid will be conditioned on friendly relations, and Egypt doesn't want to be friendly, as you put it, dignity and standing up to the West.
No, that was Hassan Salah Abu Ismail people, and those are very few.
Well, I understand, but I'm talking about the whole country.
No, the whole country, that you cannot, I didn't say this, خالص. In reality, back in the days of Mubarak, when you could only have demonstrations against America, at the beginning, before we started our anti-Mubarak demonstrations. And, you go to the people and they would be like, down with America, whatever. And then you go to one of them and be like, I can get you a green card. And then they're like, oh, sure, cool, let me get America. So really, it's all about output and outlets. I'm not saying that people in Egypt are very much pro-Americans, but I'm just saying that the idea of American hate is greatly exaggerated. And what we're talking about Hassan Ismail people has to do with dignity, not against America per se, but against everyone. The feeling that you've been stepped on for over like 3,000 or 4,000 years. It's a hard thing to reconcile psychologically. So no, there's gonna be friendly relations in that regard. Whether it's apparently friendly or hidden friendly, it's a different story. But there's always gonna be backdoors of communication between the two countries.
Yes, right here, please.
أيوة بقى.
My name is Mina, and I have a couple of questions for you. You mentioned the U.S. support to liberals. I would like to know who are those liberals, and when you said the classical liberals, and who did you mean by the classical liberal?
I mean you, Yamina.
Sorry?
I mean you, Yamina. You're a classical liberal. You should be supported. You're here.
Well, I have only I have a comment. I don't know if you agree with me or not.
No problem. Go.
I think is because of the spirit of the revolution was empty and superficial enough, leading. We find those secular activists that the Western media, they were celebrating them. Eventually, they are running behind a Ba'athi guy like Hamdin Sabahi. Or Islamist guy like Abdelman Abul Muftuh. So if you would disagree with me on this, if you think that the revolution was, I know you were pro-revolution.
Mm-hmm.
How?
I know you're not pro it first.
Okay.
Go on.
How can you why do you think this happened now?
All right. Okay. Here's the problem. In reality. Any revolution, in order for it to happen, there are three aspects to it. A political aspect, a cultural aspect, and a social aspect. Egyptian revolutionaries got too enamored with the political aspects and not focus on the social cultural aspects, which is why we lost. Any revolution, at the end of the day, is cultural. It has to actually establish the new social norms and rules and the new culture that it actually promotes. And that would actually require you to go all over Egypt, and promote your culture, which was not what the revolutionaries did because they're too busy with the political fight. So they call everybody from all over the country to come to Tahrir, instead of actually staying where they are and actually growing in numbers. That was, for example, the issue that I was sitting in the committee when they were deciding the last thing, the national strike day, and you would have all those revolutionary forces, and they would gather 1,000 people from all over the country, and I'm just like, dude, if you left your people there and have them work and gain the trust of the people, you'll be able to get 20,000 people, and then suddenly you'll actually be a force to be reckoned with, and that's the issue. There's a definition of the street. People believe that street work is actually going to demonstrations and sit-ins, while actual street work is the ability to get the street that you're in to actually move to your command and trust you enough, which is not happening. Now, whether or not it's been empty, it's not the matter of emptiness. The matter is that the majority of people who are in the revolution were non-ideologically aligned to begin with. Egyptians did not know ideologies until now because nobody cares about politics. Nobody really knew anything about politics until now. So when it comes down to it, it ends up being who you feel more comfortable with, or who do you see less objections on? So if you take a look at it, for example, people who are supporting someone like Hamdin Sabahi, who I have objections over, there are people who did the process of elimination. They don't want to vote for Musa. They'll never vote for Shafiq. They don't want Al-Fatah because he's an Islamist. They think Khalid Ali is a media creation. The only person who is kind of old enough at the same time, kind of rings true to them, Hamdin Sabahi, so we're going to go with that.
He's a leftist candidate.
He's a leftist candidate. But that's the issue. The issue is that in Egypt, the game is about rhetoric. Like, a lot of people will go vote for someone because he speaks well. Not necessarily over the views. I mean, after the parliamentary elections, I would meet people who would this.
That never occurs in America.
No, of course it does here. No, but not in the way it happens here. I mean, a lot of people who voted Kotla or upper middle class or whatever, they would say, the people voted for Islamists because they're ignorant, and they'll vote for whoever the mosque tells them to do. So I go and ask her, I'm like, well, who did you vote for? And she's like, well, that guy, and then doesn't remember the name of the other person. I'm like, well, yeah, because somebody basically gave you a piece of paper that had the two names in it, and day of the elections, you just went and voted for because someone told you those are good people, not Muslim Brotherhood. Political ignorance is across the social classes, across social backgrounds in Egypt because nobody knew anything about this before. So I'm sorry, you can call it hollow. I'll call it, the byproduct of a Mubarak regime for 30 years.
Thank you. Yes, in the back there, please.
Thank you for your comments. My name is Tom Plufjon. I'm with the Cairo Review out of Cairo. My question is kind of based on about the candidates and a general question about the revolution as a whole. One of the things that we haven't talked on has been the security situation in Egypt and how it's kind of deteriorated, gone from a police state in a sense to one lacking security. It was mentioned briefly by the question earlier. My question is, Omar Suleiman obviously represented a large part of the population, or at least a particular part, that is looking for more security in Egypt. Without his candidacy, does that population immediately turn to Shafiq, or do we look to kind of a split personality? Do some of those people go up one place and some go elsewhere? Just general thoughts on that, because I think there is a large amount of the population there whose primary concern is the security situation and stabilizing things in the streets. Thank you.
Well, here's the thing. People who are going to vote, the Omar Suleiman votes don't necessarily mean that the votes are going to go to Shafiq or Amr Musa, automatically, because some people will just not vote. That's also a possibility. But the contingent of them that will go to Shafiq because unlike every other candidate, Shafiq has no problems or no apologies of, taking rhetoric that is anti-revolution. And in a field of very much wishy-washy centrist candidates who want to capture the center, it becomes appealing to find someone that has an actual, strict position, streamlined position. What it actually means he's going to get any more than 2 million votes remains to be seen. I really doubt that he'll be able to really affect change or really encapture lots of votes, but we'll see. Amr Musa is still the front runner, but the issue with Amr Musa is that he is kind of like, that half-eaten sandwich that you found in your fridge at 3 in the morning when you're hungry. You don't know how it got there. You're not really sure what's in it, but you're hungry and it will do. Amr Musa will do, okay? Primarily. So I think people who vote for Omar Suleiman might go with Amr Musa for that reason, but he's not really going to satisfy the issue that they're facing, because for them, Omar Suleiman represented security. And and actually speaking, away from being a revolutionary, I completely oppose him. But personally, I weep because I was expecting a kind of a very interesting campaign coming from him. And I believe it's the kind of campaign Amr Musa is trying to do and is failing, which is, while everybody else campaigns to be president, Omar Suleiman would have campaigned at being president. Literally, he will just give a speech and then the police will do some show of work, or there'll be an issue and make a phone call and resolve the situation. And that's exactly what Amr Musa is trying to do right now. And he's failing because, again, he is campaigning and not doing it. He does not have the kind of connections that Omar Suleiman has, primarily.
Yes, on the right, please.
Hi there, Zach Ruckman from the National Democratic Institute. Thank you for being with us today. At the end of your opening remarks, you briefly started talking about democracy promotion, and I think you seem to indicate that you don't think it's a good idea for the U.S. to be doing democracy promotion in Egypt. So I was wondering if you think that there's a way the money can be better spent, and what you would have democracy promotion groups?
Well, I actually have an article that's going to be on fikraforum.com. Plug. Okay,
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
You can say it again.
Yeah, fikraforum.com. Check it out. But basically, I think it's not going to work through the conventional method of actually giving, monetary aid to the NGOs in Egypt. I think that if there's actually interest in promoting democracy in Egypt, it should transfer that money into. Personally speaking, that's my project. I've talked to the EU about this. Thousands of scholarships for people from all over Egypt to actually come to the States for college for 4 years. The idea is it's not going to be a political party training that's going to get people excited over democracy. It's for people to understand how democracy works and how it looks like. And one of the best ways to do so is actually having them living and experiencing it like firsthand in a country here or in another Western country. After doing that for 4 years with conditions that they cannot stay and they have to go back, when they go back to whatever government they came from, they're actually going to start sensing immediately the things that are wrong in the country. And if you have, the negotiation has been over about to 2,000, 10,000 scholarships. So within 4 years, you'd have 10,000 people all over the governorates who, have experienced a civil rights focused country and seen democracy firsthand. And then the year after, you're going to have another 10,000. The year after, you're going to have another 10,000. And that's exactly the kind of force you need to build. One of the arguments we've been having inside the party is the people who always believe that you need to have more members, inside the party. And I'm like, we don't need more members. We need more votes. You need to actually not expand your, members. You need to expand your voter base. You need to raise your voters, so to speak. The reason why the liberal parties or socialist party, whatever, failed is because they're all competing on 23% of the population instead of trying to expand that voter base to about 40 or 50%, which is what they would need in order to seize the kind of power that they would require to actually rule, which is exactly what we're aiming to do over the next 4 years. And that's the thing. If you have people who have firsthand tried and experienced it, instead of heard theoretical talk about it, and seen the difference between what happens outside and what happens inside the country, you'll have actual people who are local to the governments, who have seen it, who will be trusted by their locals as well, of how things should be and how it should change, which is what you need to do. You don't want someone from the States coming in and telling them this is how things should be better. You want someone who's local, who they trust, who will actually tell them how things are supposed to change or whatever, and have other people like-minded start helping him in that. Personally speaking, that's the thing. It also removes the aid money, the democracy promotion money, away from the negotiation table with the Egyptian government at all, which in its sense also prevents any kind of unfortunate situation like what happened in NDI and IRA to ever happen again, or being used as a bargaining chip in order to transfer that money into more economic or military aid. But that's just my opinion.
Let me close by asking you two brief questions. You just raised a very interesting prospect. Lots of people look at the parliamentary elections in Egypt, see that the Islamists together won 77%, and have thrown their hands up and say, there is no future for a liberal alternative in Egypt. Just no future. You raised a different prospect, which is, in the not too distant future, one election, maybe 2 elections, if it's done right, indeed there is a potential liberal future. So just to firm that up, in your view, if politics is done right, is there indeed a competitive liberal alternative that you see emerging in Egypt in another election cycle?
If we actually watch out for the pitfalls that we're facing, definitely yes. One of the issues that we're starting to pay attention to right now is that the Muslim Brotherhood economic arm is going after any successful businessman who is not Islamically inclined. What they're trying to do is figure out how he actually makes its money and try to replicate that model or destroy the business that he has from underneath him, in order to prevent us from having a donor base in the future that will actually support our ideas. So we're starting to actually take measures against that. So I would say to anybody who believes that the country is heading towards an Islamist drought or a Muslim Brotherhood-controlled drought, compare the votes that the FGP has gotten in the parliamentary elections with the votes that Morsi will get in the presidential elections. And then you will see how down their popularity has actually gone. for them actually to be unpopular does not necessarily mean it's good news. It's some good news for us because we're getting the center back, but it also means that the Salafis are getting stronger. So within 4 years, if we get to discredit or completely weaken the Muslim Brotherhood, we are going to face, the next big monster, the next big bad, which is going to be the Salafi party. But it's going to be good because it's going to have a clearly defined ideological line. You're not going to have people who think that Salafis are centrists, so to speak. So that works out for us.
And then just lastly, everything we've described for the last hour and a half has to do with traditional electoral and governing politics. In your view, has the era of Tahrir Square, sort of mass outpouring, provoking change, is that era past in Egypt?
I think it's definitely, I'm not going to say it's definitely past in Egypt, but I think it will start happening elsewhere other than Tahrir, as it should be. I mean, one of the things that people have called about, which is the end of military rule. Well, if you want to end military rule, you do not go to the Ministry of Defense and you do not go to Tahrir. When you end military rule, you go to every institution and governorate that's actually controlled by ex-military or currently military individual and demand their removal. The idea of centralized power, that this is the problem of symbolism. People have come to believe that Tahrir is a magical land, that if you control it, you control the 7 keys of kingdom and you can bring down the evil Tower of Saruman and the scab that resides in it. Not gonna happen. If you don't actually gain traction with the people, it's not gonna happen. If they don't see you in their local areas fighting for their causes, they're not gonna be with you. So I think and this is why the revolution actually worked. It didn't work because of Tahrir. It worked because it was in every governorate. Of course, none of them were as sexy as Tahrir, and none of them got focused on as much as Tahrir. But the reality is, what happened in Suez, what happened in Alexandria, what happened elsewhere was far more relevant than what happened in Tahrir and the battle that happened in Tahrir. And that is the game, to return it to its root, decentralize, go everywhere. And that's the only way for that to actually happen again and be effective.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.